So give me just a second and I'll double check on YouTube and Facebook.
All right.
What kind of trees are those guys behind you?
I don't know.
Green ones.
Kind of looking tree.
But they are there a certain kind of cypress or tall, like a tall pine. I don't know the exact name of them. They're great. They're beautiful trees. Yeah.
Nice.
You guys are good to go, so proceed as usual.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Kate. I'll read the topic in front of you, everyone, and the key lesson, and then we'll get started. You can follow along with me. The keys you need to free yourself from the prison of the past. And our key lesson reads, negative reactions, in fact, any form of painful resistance, prevail only when we fail to remember it is at once our divine right and our work to transform and transcend them. All right, Guy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Doug. It's a little disconcerting when we broadcast like this because I've got my face, which I'm not always that glad to see, is like in 5 places on my screen. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're with us. Glad you can join us in our time together. As always, I want to remind you, and it's a critical remembrance, that I'm not here to so much teach you as I am here to show you lessons that await within you to be revealed and realized so that you are no longer dependent upon anyone or anything outside of you to help you not just understand, but ultimately rise above all of the unwanted and difficult moments that follow us through this life. To me, and I hope one day to you, it is an amazing thing that men and women can suffer as extremely as they do, to the extent that they do. And like a child handed an ice cream cone after it stubbed its toe, it forgets in an instant because it has in front of it a new pleasure, a new desire, and a new identity correspondingly. And that person just goes back to sleep, having failed to learn the lesson that was presented to them in that moment because they failed to enter into the moment that was presenting it. I just don't have the words. I certainly been trying for 40 years, more than 40 years, and I'll keep going until I don't have a breath in this body to encourage you and help you to see the things that you need to see that no one can show you. We can point to these things. That's all any true teaching or true teacher does, if she is a true teacher, and if it is a true teaching. So I want to start, but I don't want to bring it up on the screen yet, Eric, with a riddle. I wrote a riddle to set the stage for all that we're going to look at together. Once we solve that, we can get into the heart of this material. But before I bring on this riddle, I want to try to bring you in as best I can into a much bigger picture than we are used to seeing. Imagine somebody goes on a tour of, I don't know, the Grand Canyon. And the first part of the Grand Canyon, if you've ever been there, is they might drop you down into this valley on this narrow ledge, or you might actually enter from the bottom through these caves. So imagine somebody who walks into one of these caves, and it's cold or it's hot, and it's very hot at the bottom of the canyon. And within 10 minutes, they can't stand it, and they leave. And then somebody asks them, well, how was the Grand Canyon? They go, it was terrible. Well, what did you see of it? And then if that person was honest, they'd say, well, I saw these rocks, and there was this heat, and I hated it. The person didn't see the Grand Canyon. Anybody who actually sees the Grand Canyon is enlarged by the fact that they're experiencing some aspect of their own consciousness. That's what all of the revelations are. So what I want to do is help you to see the grand picture. Because without being able to see the big picture, we're lost at the start. And the first thing this mind does when it gets negative is it reduces everything to this tiny little point that, by the way, stabs me as we grab it. So the first big picture, every scripture alludes to it. St. Paul said, we struggle not with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities. Now, in this childish, immature religion life that we call real religion, we imagine some red fellow with horns and a tail and all. No, Paul wasn't. He was saying that we think that our struggles are with the people and the problems and the places around us, with this blood, this flesh. That is not the struggle. This flesh and blood is the instrument presently in its unconscious nature of powers and principalities, of regions and realms, of mansions within kingdoms that are above us and below us, that we have no idea are never-endingly acting upon us and turning us, as it were, because of our unawareness of these powers and principalities. What does that mean? That govern us. We're so lost, it's incredible. We'll sit and hate the government, left, right, up or down, I don't give a hoot, and believe that our struggle with the government, with this religious body, with this world politic, believe that that's a real struggle. No, you're in the hands of something that wants to struggle, because that's how it derives its identity, is through resisting something. So that we're in the hands of a consciousness that only knows want, not want. Yes and no, that's all it knows. And we're thrown back and forth, driven in a circle with no idea what's happening to us. And that's what we have to look into. That's what I want to look at with you today, is some of these powers and principalities that govern us without our knowing it, because we can't see them. And we can't see them because our attention is always placed outside of us, where this very body of governing powers and principalities points our attention, so that we are ignorant of what's going on within us, because we're so identified and captured with what we don't want going on outside of us. So let's bring up the riddle. That took a little too long, but I wanted to set the stage. Here's the riddle. Coming to a theater near you now. All I see is the key lesson, Eric. Is that what's up there? And everybody else can see the... Please just speak up in the interest of time.
Yes, everyone can see the riddle.
Thank you. Here's the riddle. It says, answer this riddle and be released from the invisible prison of the past. No. Answer this riddle and be released from useless conflict and its suffering. Now I'm bringing you in here, so this is a riddle. Imagine you're standing in front of the Sphinx. You can't go on with your journey unless you answer it. Here's the riddle. What's the last thing you would ever suspect that is, in truth, the first thing to turn any moment dark? Something that, even as it promises to release you from the pain of an unwanted moment, is secretly dragging you into its looming shadow, delivering you into the waiting hands of an unconscious nature that creates and sustains this circle of useless suffering. What is the last thing you'd ever suspect, in truth, is the first thing to turn any moment dark? So over on the board here, I don't know where I would see that actually. Where do I go to see that now?
Well, I would send you messages, Guy, but there's nobody...
Okay, well, we'll just wait a moment. Maybe nobody can guess the riddle. And if we don't get any responses in a few moments, if you don't want to take an active part in our exploration, that's fine. Okay, there is an answer. The promise of a better time to come. And that is one of the things that we would suspect is going to free us, but in turn doesn't. There's one. Just we're going to look at a couple of these. When we do our live classes when I'm in Oregon at the foundation, we have a pretty active board this way, and students in the room contribute. The last thing the person says, this consciousness, Okay, let's just keep a couple more. And then, like a game show host, I'll turn all the cards over and say, no. What thought comes into my head to rescue me? Hope. That's another answer. That's something that we would never suspect. In truth, is the first thing to turn any moment dark. Imagination, good answer. Okay, they're starting to pour in now. But what I want. All right, so thank you. At least we primed the pump a little bit. You might want to write it down. It's a one-word answer, and then we're going to examine it for the duration of our time together. The last thing that any of us would suspect is, in truth, the first thing to turn any moment dark, and that when it appears promising to release us from the pain of that unwanted moment, isn't releasing us, but remanding us into its world and into its shadow. And the answer to the riddle is resistance. The one thing that none of us would suspect, because it's the first thing that we identify with and turn to rescue us, because out of resistance comes all of the ways in which the consciousness responsible for that resistance promises it will reconcile this pain, this ruinous moment, promises to save us. Our study is into resistance, as you'll see. So here's the problem, laying it out. We all want to be illuminated. We want to be an enlightened human being, someone who's patient and compassionate and uncompromised. There's no question that all of us have that in our hearts, that we would, like Paul, want to do the good we should instead of the evil we would not. But we know, you and I, without having to debate it, in fact, very much because of this desire that we have, that we don't do the good that we would. And more often than not, we find ourselves in conflict with others. It's like built into it. Within a few moments, you gather a few people and you can start to feel there's something strained going on between them. And of course, what you can't see is all the conversations going on in everybody's head that's busy comparing what's going on in that moment to some expectation they had of it or something that they don't want to experience as a result of that gathering. So with every change in life, literally, every word that someone says, we are forever judging ourselves according to how we experience this moment. And the way we experience this moment is invariably some contradiction between how I want to see myself, how I see you, and the way I actually am and what I'm perceiving you to be. So in those moments, if you're following me, I trust you are, all of my familiar solutions in the moment of that conflict that always include suffering. You know, we really don't know that we're suffering until the pain reaches a certain pitch. Most of us have no awareness at all of this sort of dark, heinous, homeostatic suffering that goes on in this unconscious nature because we've learned to live with it at a certain level. When it hits that point, then it's the boil over time. But what I'm gaining at now is that all we know in those moments is to listen to what? Listen to something, in this instance, listen to what resistance to the moment is telling us we need to do in order to escape the pain of that moment that is the product of the resistance. So up comes blame, shame, regrets, new plans. And we should be able to see, without me elaborating, that none of the things that we are handed over to do to escape the unwanted moment do anything but postpone the inevitable return of a similar experience with different people in different places, but nevertheless an experience that I will resist again, and then again, and then again. Because wherever I go, I take with me something that I don't know travels with me to measure every moment before it unfolds and to determine whether or not that's something that I want or don't want. I'm going to let that just sit in for a moment because I want to make a transition with you if you've understood what I've said so far. The one thing that we never suspect is that the source of all of this useless suffering is nothing other than negative identification. Don't throw it away. Negative identification. What is negative identification other than identifying with the moment we don't want? Negative identification is the unconscious giving of ourselves over to the analysis, the criticism, the judgment, all of the machinations of the very moment we don't want. So that negative identification is what happens when our attention is taken by the onset of this resistance and placed for us by that unconscious resistance on the very thing that we don't want in our life. So that the more I attend to what I don't want, the more I resist what I don't want, and the more I resist what I don't want, the more experience I have of not wanting it. That's negative identification. And we have no clue that this negative identification is born out of this growing resistance to the moment. Why? Because as our resistance to the moment grows, it seems to be bringing along with it all of the protective measures we need to save us from the very condition that that consciousness has created. You have to see it. When you feel resistance, your mind is scuffling around. It's looking in every possible corner of the content of itself. Please. It seems like it's looking for this, that, or the other outside of us in a world of possibilities. It is looking only at the possibilities known to itself. And it finds the possibilities known to itself only in the darkened corners of itself. And every corner of that darkened unconscious mind is filled with the past. Period. And it is our unconscious identification with the past that is producing the resistance to that moment. So we can begin to see we are caught. And I wrote these words down, and they're okay to say. We're caught in a kind of what do they call it? The fog of war. What is the fog of this war? Suddenly I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm upset. I want to get away, I want to fix this. And in that moment, in that fog of war, it is actually a form of blindness. It is a blindness that is induced by this identification and subsequent dependency on this resistance to save us from our suffering. I hope that you're able to see this with me. Moment comes, I don't want you to be like that. I don't want to go through this. Why am I there? It's too darn hot. It's too darn cold. I'm hungry. People are the worst. I walk and I'm suddenly filled with resistance. As I'm filled with resistance, I have no awareness of the conflict in it. Because resistance says the conflict is a condition outside of me. When the condition outside of me is not the source of the conflict, it's actually working divinely, I might add, to reveal to me the real conflict inherent in this unconscious nature that comes into every moment having already determined how that moment or that person or that situation should unfold. And so in the strangest twist, I guess you would call it, I am literally a moment caught by identifying with the source of the problem that is in turn telling me how to protect myself from it. And in that moment, if you're following me, it never occurs to us, and I'm asking you to see whether this is true or not, it never occurs to us to question the character of this resistance. Not to mention that before I even know there was a moment I don't want, something in me knew that. The usual I follows the resistance because resistance resistance resurrects old I's. Resistance resurrects these parts of us that have already decided how people, places, and events should go, all based on conditioned memory. And when it confronts these challenges to the security of these memories, of this content of the past, then the only thing it knows to do, it feels threatened. And when it's threatened, all it sees is its own solutions. So it never asks anything about the nature of this pain. When was the last time, honestly, that you were filled with resistance, caught up thinking about this, these regrets, this problem, where are you going to go, what are you going to... When was the last time that you ever actually thought to yourself, what in the name of God is driving these thoughts and feelings? We never ask it because we're too busy identifying with those thoughts and feelings that are proffered up by this resistance and its nature. And we just go through this circle of life, believing that somehow or other the pain born of this resistance is actually appearing the way it is to rescue us and save us from the pain. And so we go on living with this unquestioned sense of self, because each time that it appears, meaning the resistance and the I, they're one thing, this resistance and its corresponding I, this resistance and this sense of self that knows what's wrong because it's told what's wrong, that becomes instantaneously, temporarily anyway, satisfied with what amounts to what we know, if we're honest, are nothing but temporary solutions. And when we're identified with temporary solutions, because they temporarily satisfy us, we never see what goes on or what's beyond, if you will, because that's one of the questions we're going to look at. What is beyond this, I'm going to use a certain set of words, this resistance-induced prison. This resistance-induced prison. What is this resistance-induced prison? It is a consciousness that only knows to not want what challenges what it does want, and then only knows to want what it needs to get away from what it doesn't want. It is a consciousness that is in a constant circle. And it never knows that it's circling because there is a gap. Imagine my hands are this circle, and right here is this space. This space between this circle is where not wanting identifies with what it does want, and now it wants what it does, and it makes the circle until something challenges what it became identified with. And in that gap between want and not want, we fall asleep. I'm fully identified with wanting something until something happens. Now I don't want something. I don't want this. I'm so filled with not wanting, so full of resistance until resistance suggests the plan or the new thing to do. And then I'm in the hands of this. So I go to sleep wanting and not wanting, believing somehow or other without any clue whatsoever that that's the rescue when I'm captured in what I'm calling a resistance-induced prison, where the pain of not wanting, with its corresponding identity, literally disappears into the next half of the circle where it's imagined it's free until it finds out it's not again. Now, if you see any of this with me, here I'm in pain, people just aren't doing what they're supposed to do, he's not, she's not, I'm not what I want to be. I resist my own manifestations. And when that resistance comes up, it makes the proposition, here, guy, do this, become that, think this, go there. And in that split second, without any awareness at all, that resistance, which doesn't exist without the insistence of a certain body of memories, a certain governing body of thoughts and images already in place, that when I do that, I think resistance has disappeared. That's what we call relief. What we call relief is the temporary disappearance of a resistance that's so strong we identify with it, because when we identify with something else, the resistance seems to go away. and we never suspect that the thing that I'm now identified with which forms an image, an attachment, a dependency. The thing I'm now identified with, excuse me, will become the next source of this resistance. That's this circle. This is that resistance-induced prison. So we think resistance disappears, instead of recognizing that it exists as it does, because our familiar sense of self, without our knowing it, is actually anchored to a legion of points in time. Anchored to a legion, meaning many points in time. Now, what does that mean? Anchored to a legion of points in time. What are these points in time that I'm referring to? We are, the image comes to my mind, I don't know if you've ever seen it, one of those giant cork boards with all the pins in them, with the little pin-up notes and all the various things. Right? This consciousness is like a giant cork board with an innumerable number of pins that were placed at the moment of the painful event. Don't want that, have to avoid these things, go there when this happens. And we don't know that our consciousness is literally, has within it, anchored in it, these old images and beliefs, these ideas, opinions from the past that we didn't even formulate ourselves. They're just there. And all of these images, these points of time, I hope I get that idea across to you. Any image that remains something that we are identified with is a point in time that is part of our sense of security. Because I rely on it. It tells me what happened. It tells me where to go. It tells me what to do. Anytime that machine starts, born of the resistance to something that challenged it. So there it is. And suddenly, here's that pin and And all of those anchors, these pins, these points in time, anchored, by the way, not just individually, but individually and collectively. Because what we call our individual memories, first of all, are not really our individual memories. Because if you've ever asked somebody if they remember something the way you remember it, most of them don't remember it, if they remember anything at all. And as far as collective memories, what do you think racial consciousness is? What do you think all of the things that drive the various ethnicities, the various religions, the various countries? Each and every one of us knows that German people are different than Irish people. Irish people are different than Brazilians. Why? Because we are raised in a kind of pot that is filled with the collective consciousness of those individuals that we are born into as a race. And all of that colors everything that we do. And we have no idea that all of this sits down there. These points in time, not just recently at the taco stand, but 10,000 years ago when we were trying to figure out what to do to get something to eat. All of that ingrained in this consciousness, and all of it interacting for us without our knowing it is doing so. That's the whole point of these talks. There's a matrix of thoughts and feelings, and that matrix of thoughts and feelings is the source of our collective and individual resistance, with its equally conditioned conflict and suffering. I'm just looking at the clock. Now, what have we gotten to? Take a deep breath. Slow it down. If you've followed, and all you have to do is catch a little of this. Real ideas, truthful teachings are seeds. The talks are ways in which we turn over the ground, reveal whatever is lying under there, bring it up so that the light can do what it does naturally, and then seeded into this consciousness, seeded into the soul, are those principles that it recognizes as positive and true for its own growth. And they have their own action. Never worry about, I don't understand this. If you can feel it, you've understood it. So let's summarize to date. What I've said means that without knowing it, you and I, everyone we know, we are unconscious keepers, and hence the creator of every moment that we want to escape. say it again, without knowing it, we are the unconscious keeper and therefore the creator of every single moment that we want to escape. It's a 60s expression, but it's mind-blowing, and it will, God willing, blow your mind in the right meaning of the words. It'll open you up, and you start to see that whatever that event is, and the sense of self that appears with it, that's so painful, doesn't exist without resistance. There is no painful moment without resistance. And there is no resistance without an unconscious nature that has entered into that moment, already comforted, contented, and consoled by the security inherent in its endless relationship with its own memories, its own thoughts and feelings. And every time that that resistance appears, I said, it seems to protect us, but it isn't protecting us. The resistance is actually the resurrection of that memory. The resistance is actually the resurrection of that association and all that's connected to it that has the ache in it that it does. If you want to write something down, here's a thought as we go along. Resistance is an old memory revitalized and resurrected. Resistance is an old memory revitalized and resurrected. Now, if I just stopped for a minute and said, will you let that in? The moment doesn't create the resistance. The way she said, what they did, whether it was 5 minutes ago or 50 years ago. The moment doesn't create the resistance. The moment is an active force that touches what is passive and waiting for it. And when that consciousness, that unfinished piece of business, that memory that sits there stewing, suffering, the content, and when it's stirred, suddenly I'm aware of it. So that understood properly, that if resistance is an old memory revitalized and resurrected, meaning brought back to life, can't you see that? God, I talk to people all the time, and they can't wait. They can't wait to talk about something painful in their past. To tell you about him and her and what they did and why they shouldn't be like that. And it's literally a human being with a cat o' nines flagellating themselves. And with every blow that that unconscious nature delivers to itself in its unconscious state, it exacerbates the pain and proves to the individual in the instrument of that governing unconscious body that it's important that it sort through this so it can figure out what happened and then protect itself from ever happening again. And every time we try to protect ourselves from a moment from ever happening again, it's happening again in that moment. No one sees it, but you can. If you actually understood, resistance is a moment where, by the grace of God, something is acted upon, something asleep, incomplete, broken, in a nature that never knew what to do with the condition that brought up that content, and it sits there, and then something comes along and it stirs it, resurrects it. And if we're present in that moment, instead of blaming the circumstances, we can actually do the one thing, the only thing actually that we can when we understand what I'm describing to you, is that I then have to become the witness of that which has been resurrected in me. Not the individual identified with it, not the one seeking protection from its appearance, not the one hating the moment, blamed for it, but the only thing that's left to me in that moment is to realize that prior to that, my sense of self was anchored, whether I understood it or not, in some unseen memory. And every unseen memory, as you should be able to see, has a corresponding identity a body of associated thoughts and feelings that come with that memory. And the associated thoughts and feelings that appear with that memory have an identity that was formulated and crystallized in the moment that memory took place, meaning was formed there, the moment not allowed to complete itself. Just try to see this with me. You know, when you see something that's absolutely breathtaking and beautiful, that there is a kind of memory, but it is a memory of recognition. Beauty is a moment of recognizing that there is no difference between the observer and the observed, that it is a graceful moment. Where most of us, when we remember something, it isn't filled with grace, far from it. It grates on us because we believe that we're apart from what we are remembering and that the memory is the problem, failing to see there would be no problem memory if there weren't some unconscious person embracing it in that moment. Think about it. What is the pain, the prison of any bad memory without an unconscious nature that recalls it so that it can then resist it and then regret its own recollection? Isn't that what a bad memory is? Something in me brings it up, and I sit there like some stooge in an old dank theater about to show a horror movie, and then I blame the owner of the theater for me sitting there watching it and having all of this pain as I watch what unfolds, when the only reason there's pain is because I'm sitting there reliving what this unconscious nature insists it must relive so that that identity and all, of course, all the measures to save myself from it can go on. If you've understood this at all, you have to ask yourself, and God willing you will. You know, there is a certain point in a person's work where they never have to ask themselves questions anymore. Because everything that is unfolding as a result of being willing to be fully present in the moment the seeming question appears, the answer appears with it. That's what enlightenment is. It is understanding that there's no necessity, not only for me to ask questions about this, that, or the other, but that every natural question, every supernatural question is the moment where there is a connection between these active and passive forces, between what is timeless and what is in time, this body of memories. When they meet, there is always a disparity. In that disparity, there's a question. In that question, there's a desire. And in that desire, there is the fulfillment, all of it at the same time. So, what's beyond this unconscious nature? What's beyond this resistance? That's the question we're studying. What's beyond it? And if we're honest, most of us don't have a clue. All we are is someone who is just all the time filled with resistance. And all we are when we're filled with resistance is someone who endlessly distracts themselves to avoid the pain of the very condition that their own consciousness is calling up. Because we don't know what to do with the pain. We don't know what to do with resistance other than remand ourselves over to it, hoping that somehow or other the consciousness responsible for the resistance is going to save us from the resistance it creates. It's extraordinary. To go beyond resistance requires that we understand it. Resistance doesn't understand itself. Resistance only imagines it understands what it blames for the pain it is, for its conflict. To understand the nature of this resistance, we have to be present to ourselves. We have to see certain things. We need new self-knowledge. And the knowledge that we need is never really outside of us, honestly. I'll give you an example. I live, as most of you know, I live up on a little mountain in southern Oregon. And if you've never joined me before, I'm a bit of a naturalist. I love the animals. I love animals, every last one of them. And for whatever reasons, that love has natured a relationship with a host of creatures that live where I live. I every morning, as a rule, I hand feed a dozen or so deer, turkeys, the gamut of the wildlife up there. And I learn. I study them. And one of the things I've learned, intimately connected with resistance, is that one level of our consciousness, we are made in the image of God, but when you look at us and you watch how a human being is formed, we literally start as a single cell and we go through every embryonic stage, so that every last creature from the frog all the way through to what we call a human being is realized in an embryonic stage. We go through all of those things because we are the outcome. We are, and it seems like, and please, this is kind of complicated, but it seems like it's a passage of time that produces this form. But the truth is it's reversed. That all of these creations and sub-creations started with the Adamic, with the soul, and if you will, everything followed down, so that all of this is why Adam could identify, knew the name of all the creatures. It said, it's just a story, but it represents the fact that within us all of these creatures live. So naturally, I would know the nature of every creature since I am every creature. So if I am every creature, that means my consciousness is the consciousness of every creature. My problem is that I don't know I have the consciousness of an unconscious creature right now. Example, when the deer come, if I have in any shape or form moved a chair 2 feet to the left, one of the bins that I take the cob from, even the bench with the objects on it, if I move anything out of the place that it ordinarily is, they are filled with trepidation. You can see it. They lean up like this, and when you see deer doing this, that's the way they see. They don't see the way we do it. They lower their head to see top and bottom like this. A horse does it too. Now, why is that deer filled with trepidation? Because its consciousness, in order for it to feel secure and safe, particularly from predators, makes an imprint of everything that it sees. And that creature literally wants to walk into that imprint so that it has the security of knowing that nothing has changed in its environment. You and I think we're different than that. We're not different than that. This consciousness, and it's a compliment to call it the consciousness of a deer at this stage in our development, God help us. This consciousness doesn't just need to know where things are. It needs to know where things are that it's imagined. It imagines places and people and relationships and objects. And when it has imagined these things, it derives, like the deer do, the idea that it's protected because it knows where everything is and what it's supposed to be doing there. And if anything changes in its imagined environment, then the self that has derived the imagined security from its environment is like the deer, and it fears a predator. And who is the predator in our consciousness when things don't align with the way we've imagined them, with our memory of a moment? God, it's so deep. I don't have time to go into all of this. I wish I did. That's why I said these points in time. It's like a kind of an invisible matrix created by conditioned thoughts and feelings, requiring certain things to be in their proper place in order to balance things from our earlier life, from the pains and problems, all of that, all in this invisible movement. And we walk into a room and we think we're seeing with our eyes. We're not seeing with our eyes. This consciousness is measuring everyone and everything. Why are they sitting like that? What's that facial expression mean? Should that person be saying things like that to me? Should they be saying these things to other people? This can't be right. Look at the way that waitress is handling the food. What? And you hear it, and you're just bombarded by thoughts and feelings resisting a condition that only exists because it has been memorized. And when it's not the way it's been memorized, then it's the source of our misery. We see predators. Now you can, sorry for the mixed metaphor, you can think about this until the cows come home. And it's not going to change anything. We have to see that our comfort, and that includes our search for it, is inseparable from our demand for security. And our demand for security is 100% conditioned. Meaning that what I consider secure is when the world and everyone else in it is moving, speaking, acting, giving, not taking, everything that I have imagined prior to that moment, according to the moment I've imagined, a memory. In a prison of time that we don't know because time invents our escapes. And we escape into the time imagined, only to find out that we've escaped into nothing other than another prison, populated by the next set of memories, images, and ideas that will turn out to be predators. To understand this unconscious nature, to understand this resistance that at the level of nature is entirely proper. In fact, resistance is required for creation to take place. I've talked about this at great length. I'm not going to go into it now. Without something active and timeless, touching, stirring what is in time and passive, and bringing about in that moment a disparity because these are unequal, and in that disparity producing a need for these forces to be reconciled, the will of heaven aligned with the will of earth. Without that, there's no creation, there's no new conception, there's no birth, no rebirth. But at our level, resistance is no longer spiritual, and it certainly is not natural, other than to an unnatural mind that has become so identified with the conditions it's imagined it must enter and live with, that when it fears the moment that appears, it believes it is justified in its fear. That's a whole other topic. I'm stopping here for a moment because do you know how many times a day you think to yourself, I've got to do this, I've got to go, what's going to happen, what does this mean, now what will happen? Do you know how many times the mind runs through that obstacle course? Trying to avoid the very conditions that it first imagined into existence, that people should see me in a certain way, that I should be able to do certain things, that I should never be this kind of person. God forbid I should be like this. So all of the guilt and shame and judgment, all of those things are all perpetuated by this unconscious nature that has first decided how things should be. And then when it's not how they should be, then decides why it's not, and then what it must do in order to restore what it calls its sanity. And every act of restoration of this unconscious nature through resistance does not restore our sanity. It ensures that the insanity of an unconscious nature goes on unchecked. Because the more we identify with resistance, the more likely we are to identify with it again, because we don't know what else to do. What are we to do? How are we going to understand? How are we going to go beyond this resistance? So a quick story, and then a little summary, and we'll start our questions and answers. Imagine some super new high-tech carnival fair, I don't know what it would be, rolls into town, and they've got these massive rides. And everybody's excited about this particular fair coming because it's been all pumped up in the press about this unbelievably scary new house of terrors. I'm pausing for a moment just because And I was no different. What in the name of God is wrong with us that we want to be terrified? And the answer is, we just want some experience. So we are, and I will go into greater depth on this topic, so that we become the creators of experience instead of our real role, which is to experience creation. And the more we create experience, the more dependent we are upon that experience remaining in place. Whereas the inverse of that, is that we are the experience of creation, and creation is always new. It doesn't repeat itself. And so there's no dependency, there's no attachment, there's no sense of seeking security, because everything that is made new is secure in the forces that made it into that new conceived being. So here's a boy that hears about this ride. Now, one of the things that's extraordinary about this ride and is, let's say that somewhere along the side of the ride, before you get into the long queue to go in, the creator of the ride has made these little portals. And these portals you can look through. They're all for the sake of selling the ride, which, by the way, is ridiculously expensive. That's another strange thing about human beings. Somehow we believe the more expensive something is, the better it is. So that you look through these rides, and everybody's always, there's lines waiting just to look through, because you want to see into the ride, you want to know what's in there. And the way the ride is set up in these portals is these portals that you look through are set up so that you always see what is the most realistic, dynamic automatons, movements, so that you're forever looking at these things through the eyes of something that can only see them three-dimensionally and see them as real as possible. So you're frightened just looking through the portal. Now, who would think that the more frightened you are going in, the more you'd want to go in? But that's humanity. That's us. You don't think so? It is. The more I don't want to see what I'm looking at, the more likely I am to going into it, believing that going into it, somehow I'm going to escape it. So here's the point. One day, this boy has come there 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And his father knows. He goes, but he always stands there. And his father is a wise man. And one day he says to his son, how long are you going to stand there and look through that portal? He said, I'm not going in there. His father said, well, what if I go in there with you? Well, why would you want to do that? He knows the dad's not. He said, because I think I can show you something that might make an impact on every day of your life for the rest of your life. And for the sake of the story and time that I'm running out of, boy and dad get in the cart. And as they ride through, now, I don't know if you've ever seen this, as they ride through, things pop out. Don't unwanted moments pop out? Oh no, they pop out. And when they pop out, where does your attention go? Your attention goes to what has grabbed it. And ultimately what has grabbed it is your attention fearing whatever has grabbed it goes completely to focus on the thing that you don't want. Oh, God. Completely attending to what I'm afraid of, but not attending to it with intelligence, attending to it by having remanded myself over to the flood of thoughts and feelings that are full of fear, because that gives me that dynamic experience of myself. That's what the ride is. So as they're going through there, first couple times, then one day the boy, one more caught again, the father said, Josh, hold on a second. I want you to do something with me, and it's going to be hard. He said, the next thing that pops out, instead of looking at where it's coming from over there, I want you to do with me, I want you to turn around and I want you to look behind us. Well, why? We're going to miss the ride. Son, just please. So a couple times you can't do it. Pretty hard to take your attention off of something that you're resisting, that you're attracted to. Isn't that strange? Attracted to what I resist. But finally, the boy does, and when he does, what do you think he sees behind him that his father's trying to get him to see, that you can't see when you're looking directly at the action? He sees all of the machinery behind the action. Because that part of the ride they just went through, he can see the gears, and he can see the movement. He can see that they're on a stand with things that are so he sees that everything that he was looking at is mechanical. That's the point of the little story. And once he starts to see that it's all mechanical, meaning that it is 100% predictable, it is always going to do that. It isn't alive the way it seems, because the things that we resist only seem alive because they have vitalized and resurrected this nature that lends them their life, and hence our fear of it. That's how we go beyond resistance. We become attentive inwardly in the moment when it appears to the mechanism of it. We begin to see these events through eyes that recognize, as I asked you to write down, that resistance is an old memory, revitalized and resurrected. How many different ways can you be angry at somebody, or is anger always anger defined by the conditions that seem to lend it its meaning? All negative states, without exception, do not exist without resistance first bringing a reaction, and the reaction producing separation, and the separation producing danger, and the danger producing the further sense of resistance. We know, if we've done any work at all, if we've actually studied any of this mechanism as it's unfolding, that there is no way we're ever going to be free of this machinery of an unconscious nature until we recognize that we are still a part of that machine. Nobody wants to believe this about themselves, and of course, they remain part of a machine that denies its own manifestation. On the other hand, God willing, you've seen some of this. One of my favorite sayings is, on the other side of resistance is the flow. On the other side of the resistance is the flow. Now, what does that mean in real terms? It means, at the simplest level, you don't want to go run, you don't want to exercise, but you know the body needs to do it. So the will of the mind understands the will of the body, and it takes the body through what it doesn't want to go through. And when it does, the body's done, and as a rule, everything feels better. On the other side of the resistance is the flow. In spiritual terms, that means that on the other side of the resistance is the revelation of its source. I'll never know the revelation of the source of resistance as long as I identify with what it resists and the sense of self that comes from that. But if I can, even for a split second, see one little bit of this machinery, oh, here comes this depression, here comes this fatigue, here comes this worry, here comes what are they going to think of me, here comes why did he do that? And if for one split second I can understand, I could not be experiencing this resistance without a consciousness that dragged out of the darkness some memory of itself, and then revisiting the memory of itself tries to save itself from itself, and it can't do it. And if I understand that and see that to any extent at all, what do you think starts to happen to this consciousness that had formerly been a captive of its own unseen machination? It begins to grind down, begins to slow down. It knows it can't go there. It knows it can't do this. It begins to go through the process of negation of the conscious kind. Not me trying to figure out how to save myself, but rather me seeing that I can't be saved from a consciousness that continues to create its own tragedies. The clarity of that, the more likely I am to be the witness of that. And when I witness that, what do you think happens each and every time? That resistance that formerly I met at a threshold and I was turned back into that prison of time, that threshold becomes a doorway. And I mean literally. So that resistance gives rise to the revelations that can only be discovered on the other side of that unconscious nature that wants to keep us serving it on its side, not our true side, our true capacity to transcend this resistance and go beyond it. I know that we don't have a break now, that much I remember. So let's gather ourselves together, and Doug, you can make a couple announcements, and then we'll open it up for our dialogue, okay?
Great, yeah. Everyone, if you're new here, the dialogue is just as important as the talk, and it's all part of the experience. And what the dialogue shows the other students' relationship to the talks, how they bring it into the lab, out into the field, so we can see for ourselves, in this case, what resistance is to us and how we honor it or cherish it or how we work with it. So we'll start a good cue. We have a couple hands up there, but before we do, I have a very special announcement to make. And first of all, a reminder that all of these free online talks, excuse me, are sponsored by the nonprofit Life of Learning Foundation here in Southern Oregon, where Guy is the director. And if you can see the value of these talks for you and for others, then consider possibly making a donation. And for this month, we have something special to offer back to you. And let me get that up in front of me. And it's called To Touch the Timeless Mind. And just a brief word about what this is about. Some time ago, Guy revealed the secrets for making a revolutionary inner leap into higher awareness at the 10th Annual International Conference for Science and Consciousness, where Guy was invited to be a keynote speaker. And he gave 2 talks, and his keynote address, his last talk and special seminar presentation, Guy explained how to make a direct personal connection to one's own latent higher consciousness, which is what he did today as well. But this was in a different format and really several years ago, but very powerful. So powerful that his audience was so inspired that they rose up into a spontaneous standing ovation. So you will enjoy this talk. And really, it's a 2-part program to touch the timeless mind. And all we ask is a $10 donation or more for the foundation. You get this back, and you can go to guyfinley.org/timeless and get all this information about this program. And I can't encourage you enough. It's a great way. If you feel like making a donation, you can. You get something back that's very valuable. So do consider that. guyfinley.org/timeless and go to webinar. It's in your question box, and I think there's probably there on the other platforms as well. So do take advantage of that. All right. Also, I just want to say that all these talks are recorded, and you can find them on the various places that you're watching it. And so you can re-watch it if you wish at any time. And also, let's see. Yeah, let's go ahead and bring the people in. We have 3 questions from before, Guy, which I think Eric will load up for you. And right now we have, Deborah, your hand was up from the very beginning. I'm going to actually lower it. And if you wanted it to be in the queue, you can go ahead and raise it again and you'll be right away. But we'll start with Katrina. And again, if you want to raise your hand and go to webinar, just click on that little hand icon. Otherwise, the other platforms, write your questions in the chat box. So I think we're ready you ready to get going, Guy? Or do you have anything else you want to say?
Good to go.
Let's go. All right, Katrina, let's hear from you.
Good morning.
Hi, Kat.
Hi there. Okay, Mr. Finley, so since Wednesday, I've held very close that talk and the few things that you mentioned at the very end, quite close to my heart, and I felt like they really, they were backed up with today's talk immensely. And I want to ask, specifically, Matt deployed just a couple days ago, and since then, one thing after another, and I've watched resistance. Absolutely, wow. Just resistance is an old memory, revitalized and resurrected.
Yes.
I've seen it ceaselessly playing out, and it's happening here too. There's this massive anxiety attack anytime, but I mean, thank goodness my heart would much rather speak, or I don't know what exactly carries me through. But nonetheless, that anxiety is still there, which is clearly a memory, an old memory. It's been going on for a very long time, resurrected and revitalized. And at the end of the talk today, you had spoken about exactly how to bring about clarity. And specific to me, although I'm sure it applies to many people, could you please speak to that, like heart pounding out of your chest?
Sure.
Absolute.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you.
I'm actually glad you asked the question. I had run out of time. I had to sort of edit my own thoughts on the fly. I said that that boy, when he went through the ride with his father representing intelligence, wisdom, understanding, the boy representing you and me in our undeveloped, unenlightened state, still captivated, captured by everything that brings up this anxiety, this fear, this, oh my God, that moment. And the boy was able to see when his father could help him turn around that it was mechanical. Now, that didn't change the fact that he would still have those jumps, those fears, that anxiety. It doesn't happen like that. This is one of the problems aspirants have, is they hear an idea, and because we're used to living completely in the kingdom of thought, and it's attending nightmare imagination, identity derived from thinking, we think to ourselves, well, now I understand. I just have to turn around and see the machination. Turning around and becoming aware of the fact that this resistance is essentially the machine of an unconscious nature of these points of time, of memory, reacting to and responding to anything that threatens their sense of self, doesn't mean that the pain goes away. It doesn't mean the anxiety falls off. It doesn't mean suddenly I'm without fear. Quite the contrary. It means for the first time in my life, I'm actually aware of two worlds at once. Not the two worlds I always thought I was aware of, where the thing I feared was in one world and me who feared it was in another. That's one world called fear, divided up into observer and observed, separate from each other. The real world, the real beginning of our development, is when at last I become aware of this nature so that I'm conscious of its unconscious activity. I'm conscious of its pain. I'm conscious of its content and how it's always massaging everything to get me to some place where I won't feel it anymore. I'm conscious of the fact that I don't want to feel this, but also conscious of the fact that the more I don't want what I'm feeling, the more I feel it. So all of that, Kat, is involved. So I begin to consciously suffer this lower nature. I begin to, if you will, die for it. I don't interfere with what it's going through, and I use my awareness of what it's going through to further show me that there is a consciousness that is a captive of time, and then there is something that is timeless, that is aware of that captivity and the pain in it. Then for the first time, the true observation and the observed are a singularity. The true unification, the true integration begins. Because now I'm no longer fragmented, divided up into want and not want. I'm that which sees want and not want. And I understand the anxiety doesn't exist without a demand. And that no matter how many things I've demanded, I'm still anxious, as you witnessed. So now I'm going to bear consciously the rising up of these thoughts and feelings, these painful thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to do the only thing that becomes totally evident to me that I can. I'm going to observe them. I'm going to watch. And if you do that, you begin to enter into a world beyond resistance where revelation releases you from what has ruined your life. And that is the only real release, is through revelation. Because what are you released from other than negative identification? You're relieved from unconscious memory that has been the captive of your experience. That's it, Kat. Same thing. Going to have to work. Going to have to go through consciously what I've avoided my whole life unconsciously. And you can't do it wrong as long as you start. You make the wish, you do the work, you see the result. You make the wish, you do the work, you see the result. And eventually you will find faith. Not faith in a time to come, but faith that everything that is coming to you has come in its time for the purpose to serve the end of your, in quote, time as a captive of that time prison. On we go, Doug.
All right, Guy, we have 4 or 5 questions written, and Beatrice in the queue. Let's do a couple of the written questions.
Yes, please.
First is going to be Tony. Tony asks, spontaneity of self is awakening to eternal life in any moment. Would you agree?
All we have that's eternal when we're sitting and measuring our experience is the eternal purgatory of believing that I am separate from the moment that I'm measuring. Real life doesn't have measuring in it. Real life doesn't say to itself, this is spontaneous and it's beautiful. And real life never thinks about what is eternal because it is eternal in its reality. All of the teachings, all of the work, east, west, north, south, to bring an end to this sense of self that is a derivative of imagination, because any identity derived from imagination is a memory, and every memory that goes before us into the moment to tell us what the moment means, who we are and what we're doing and how good we are or how bad we are, every last part of that is the source of resistance, not the release from it. On we go, Doug.
Next question comes from Kiki on YouTube, from YouTube. She says, hello, Guy. I've been listening for a few weeks. I can smell what you are cooking, but default to thoughts as tools to achieve this perspective. My thoughts betray me. I don't trust my mind. I feel there is nowhere to turn. My habits maintain inertia and the dream continues. My mind says I'm stuck and I don't trust that. Around and around we go.
Ah, Kiki, what a great place. I'm beginning to see I cannot trust my own mind. Holy mother of pearl. You mean I can't trust my own fear? What a thought. I can't trust my own reason for being depressed? Oh my God. So I am for a moment, depending on the extent and depth of that understanding, that I cannot trust any thought or feeling that appears to rescue me from the condition that it was responsible for creating. I stand at the threshold of the unknown, a witness to everything that says it knows, and a participant in what unfolds because I'm willing to let what I don't know come to me and take me through that moment into another level of understanding. You're in the right place, Kiki. You're in the right place. The mind that says I'm stuck is stuck in the love of feeling stuck. Die to it by seeing it. You will, you can. Stay close. On we go, Doug.
All right, let's take Beatrice from the queue.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello. I have a question. How is this related with the hero's or heroine's journey? My point here is, could it be that our soul knows when we come to this earthly life that we will need to be aware that there is this battle of between different worlds, the good and the bad, and that we have embedded in our heart the mission of becoming the hero or the heroine. to free ourselves and help others to free themselves from that evil world. And that's why we become super hyper vigilant about where could it be that it will show now
Okay.
the bad.
Beatrice, I got it. I got it.
Good, good.
Hi, Beatrice. You know, I don't know how many years ago it was. I wish it had been sooner, but it wasn't. Having kicked around, and you know, just to be clear, we think we're the ones kicking around these thoughts and these ideas. We're not the one kicking them around. We're the ones being kicked around by them. I thought to myself, I wonder what would happen if I had absolutely no reference whatsoever for what I'm experiencing. What would happen if I found no consolation whatsoever in an idea? In the hope that somehow or other there's this journey and that God is watching over me. That these moments are designed by the soul and selected by it when it comes into life. We have to outgrow images if we want to have a real relationship with life. This is why God said, have no graven images. Beatrice, you and I and anyone who is sincere in our wish to have a life somehow vested in the divine have to recognize that the more images that go before us to make the crooked places straight, the more crooked the places become, because I never arrive anywhere other than at the next justification of why I am the way I am, the next consolation. I've said this before, and I know nobody likes it, but it doesn't change it. You have to get to the point, everybody does, if they're ever going to know anything about a suffering that they can't answer for themselves. Going to have to get to the point where I absolutely unequivocally refuse to console myself with any thought or feeling whatsoever. You can console yourself, or you can go to the place where that consolation and the need for it grows to such an extent that the divine itself sends you the consolation, and it is never in the form of anything you would imagine. Real consolation is unimaginable because it transcends the imagination of a consciousness that seeks it. On we go, Doug.
All right, we have Isabella in the queue, but I'm going to read one more question here. We have like 3 more questions written.
No good.
And this is from Mary, and you should have it in front of you. You mentioned to quietly do what life asks of you, but if you attend to this first divine desire, you shall not want. So my question is, how can we know the divine desire? How do we tune in and hear the message from the divine and know it is not our own inner subconscious being heard? And also when what we want is to accomplish something for the best of a dependent and there is no other option. And obstacles need to be overcome to get there. How do we proceed? How do we lower the volume of fear or the consequences of demands not being met?
Mary, I don't know if you can see this. God willing, you can. I feel a disturbance of some kind. Maybe I sense that there's something good, something higher, and I have a natural, innate, spiritual longing for that. Does the longing for fresh air have to be expressed in words? Or is the body naturally drawn to fresh air, to beauty, to sunlight? I have a natural longing. I didn't put it in myself. God help the human being who thinks that he or she is responsible for the longing they have for the divine. That's called narcissism. I have a longing for peace. And I know that there is no peace as long as I fear. I don't have to think about that. If I can feel the onset of a fear, a worry, or a stress, I don't have to think to myself, is that good for me or bad for me? I don't have to think to myself, what do I do with this thing that's hurting me, that's tormenting me? Because if I'm present, Mary, the action is inherent in the awareness if I'm present. And there's no thoughts in awareness. Awareness may see thoughts float through. Awareness may feel the demand and the sudden seizure of one's attention saying, well, this is what you have to do, or something yelling at you or whispering, tempting you, saying, here's what you can, awareness, all of that moves through it. And the very awareness of the content or the quality of any thought or feeling spells out in language that is beyond words the meaning and intent of every last one of those characters. So you don't have to think to yourself, what's the character of that fearful thought? Because awareness, as that fearful thought passes through it, knows everything about that nature. It is above it. And what happens, Mary, is you start with a thought, a right wish, and then into that thought, then comes the next thought. Well, what about this under this circumstances? And I wish that the best for a dependent, and I don't know what to do with the wish for the dependent. See, Mary, it gets all convoluted. K-I-S-M. Kism. Keep it simple, Mary. Keep it simple, Mary. So many times I talk to students and they're anxious about how to be free of anxiety. They're struggling, trying to figure out how to be free, not seeing that the struggle to be free is the resistance to their condition. And the answer to their condition is in seeing the consciousness, not trying to escape it. The reason the volume and the fear of consequences grows is because it's being fed by resistance, Mary. God doesn't shout, doesn't push, doesn't pull. God reveals the quality, the character, and every other infinite name that one can come up with of itself, as impossible as it seems in every single moment. So that rather than pursuing the experience of trying to create for myself a life, dealing with this fear, worrying about this, rather than trying to create for myself an experience that I recognize, I might add, I allow myself to experience creation. That's why no one can explain these teachings, ever, even Christ himself. I am creation. Not this silly man, not this brain, not this human heart. I am creation. And the more you know that, the more you never fear anything that this consciousness wants to create or fears that has been created, because you understand it as always an already being brought into this light that transforms everything into another form, another more perfected version of itself. And you're just the glad witness of this. Fear has no place. Anger. Consequences are a joke. Even though every day, time in our mind that we've laid out these points, always threatening us, consequence, consequence, consequence. God, what a world, even just to put your first step into a world where you understand anytime you have the fear of a consequence, you're in the hands of something that wants to destroy you. And I don't care what the consequence is. That's another thing. All of you, you have to get to the point where you actually say to yourself, I don't give a hoot about the consequence. That isn't saying I'm going to be irresponsible with my children. That means I'm no longer going to sell my soul to ensure that my soul goes on the way I've imagined it should in this journey that has been imagined by an unconscious nature. On we go, Doug.
All right, let's go to Isabella in the queue.
Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Isabella.
Okay, this is kind of difficult for me today because it's really fresh.
But I just wanted to let you know how helpful this was today, because I mean, wow, even your statement that the action is inherent in the awareness, because I'm going through all of this stuff, and Friday, you know, when everything hits the fan, I was like, well, my goodness, even when I'm not resisting, everything keeps flying. So I'm really just trying to sit with it. And I've gotten the impression that the fear is basically falling into a lower polarity of time, or whatever you want to call it. Like, I feel that viscerally, and I haven't known how to get out of it, because, you know, I see other people that are resisting, and, you know, but I know I'm in this, so it's not just them, that we're all in this.
Yes, we are.
And so I was like, gosh, I'm so upset, because even when I'm not resisting, I'm still in the mud. But I don't want to feel like a victim.
No, Isabella, you see, perhaps I wasn't as clear as I could have been. You and I think to ourselves that suddenly there's this resistance and I'm going to stop resisting. That's like a lion or a tiger saying, I'm going to change my stripes. The resistance is built into a consciousness that is a construct of time. It's built into it. So it's not like suddenly I have resistance. What's actually taking place is suddenly I'm aware of a resistance that is with me, and I don't know is with me until a condition challenges that time point, that memory, that identity. Then suddenly I'm aware. Now I'm aware, and I can hear it in your voice, and it's natural, but you have to get rid of it. You want to be rid of that pain. And the more you resist the pain that's born out of resistance, the more resistance there is to this pain that started in a consciousness that you are not responsible for healing. You're responsible for seeing it. And that's it.
Yeah, I'm in it. I'm totally in it.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a death, like you said. And
Yes, it is.
It's so scary, but I want to see that wizard behind the curtain so bad.
That's it.
You know?
And just look, buckle up. Just buckle up.
You.
Yeah. You're
Not comfortable.
Really? Of course it's not comfortable. I mean, look, there's an old country and western song. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
So let me agree as best I'm capable to go through this as best I'm able to, bear everything I can bear, go as far beyond, meaning allowing resistance to play itself out with me as its observer. And if I get caught and stuck, then I'll start again. But I will know something I didn't know before, because I've allowed a revelation at some level to show me what it is that's going on behind the curtain. Okay?
Thank you. Yes, the old has to go. Thank you.
Old's got to go. Yes, sir.
So appreciate you guys.
All right, Isabella. See you again.
All right, we have two more questions, Guy. We're right at the top of the hour. Shall we take those on?
Yeah, we'll politely, thoroughly deal with them.
Okay. The first question is from Annette. She says, thank you, Guy. But what is so wrong with having standards, values, and a mission statement? We can think that we are the captain of our own ship, but when we inevitably encounter a storm, we realize none of us have full control, obviously. Then here comes resistance, unless we stop and do what?
Annette, whose standard? You know, the meaning of the original, at least one of the meanings of a standard, was armies used to march under a standard, the flag of their country. That was their standard. Mission statement? If I have a business, perhaps at a practical level, I know that I need to have a certain amount of capital. I know that I need to have a certain return on my investment. And I know I need to turn over inventory, and I need to have employees that understand the purpose and the mission of the company, which is to be profitable. But if the standard I walk under is that I want people to see me as being a profitable business person, and my mission in the moment is always to ensure that people do see me that way, my standard and my mission is the very source of my misery. End of story. There's no mission to life, Annette. Missions are invented by people who don't know or have a life. I invent a mission so I can be someone on it. I have a standard so I can march beneath it and challenge and argue and fight with anybody that doesn't agree to the standard, to that country, to that consciousness I defend. What if, Annette, and I know you've been studying long enough to consider it, what if I actually one day realize here I am, and I wouldn't be out of control if something hadn't challenged my standard and my mission? Which means I can't separate my mission and my standard from the fact that I'm living in chaos at this moment and asking chaos how to get out of it. Ask these questions inwardly, Mary. See the result. Then your answers will come to you as surely as I'm able to respond to you in this moment. Let's go on, Doug. Last question for today.
All right. This question is from Larry, and I do see Sherry Lynn, you jumped in. We can have you first on Wednesday. This guy will be back in Southern Oregon for regular time on Wednesday.
Yes.
So do join us then, or you can ask the question behind the scenes and we'll bring it up. So we'll end this morning's time, or this afternoon for you, Guy, with Larry. He says, I understand, but I have a hard time breaking away to see the mechanical nature of the event.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly right. I understand, but my understanding doesn't go all through me. I understand here. My body has its own understanding. My heart certainly has its own understanding. And when they're brought together and one is dominating the other, there's another understanding filled with conflict because I'm suffering. I know better than this, but I can't stop doing it. That's what St. Paul said. I don't do the good I would, or do the evil I don't want to do. That is a man, Larry, like yourself, who is beginning to recognize that there is this constant state of conflict between a part of us that actually knows what is right and true and a part of us that drags us into doing what it says is right and true in order to escape the chaos of its own workings, of its own machination. I said it to Kat, if you were listening, Larry. Just because I understand doesn't mean I'm not going to suffer. The truth is, the more I understand, the more I'm going to suffer consciously everything that I've failed to recognize up until that point. The difference between unconscious suffering, which is what happens when I remand myself over to my mission and my standard and all the rest of that nonsense by which I'm defined, the difference between unconscious suffering is that it just goes on, because resistance begets resistance. Conscious suffering is me beginning to understand that unconscious suffering and resistance begets more of itself. And I die to it. I give it up. I suffer it in the present moment instead of trying to promise myself a way to get away from it or change it. That's where the rubber meets the road, Larry. There isn't a spiritual teaching, a true spiritual teaching, that doesn't speak about the necessity of an individual to gather himself up, to gird himself, to pick up the cross, all of the various things, from the Dhammapada to the Upanishads, to the New Testament, to the Old Testament. Every last one of them talks about this struggle. The beauty of entering into the struggle is that you enter into it not knowing what's going to happen, and if you stay in it, God lets you see what is happening and the eventual outcome, which is the freedom of the soul, no longer struggling to escape the content and the confines of this conditioning that it has been buried in, veiled through, covered up with. That's all. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Eric. I'll see everybody Wednesday night. I'll see you when I get back home.